A brief about Russia-Ukraine war. Russia and Ukraine do not share any diplomatic ties. Since February 24th of 2022, there has been a war between the two nations. The Russo-Ukrainian war began in 2014 after the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity, when unmarked Russian forces invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and later illegally annexed it. At the same time, pro-Russian separatists engaged the Ukrainian military in an armed conflict for control of eastern Ukraine. On February 24th of 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of the Ukrainian mainland across a broad front, further escalating the conflict and forcing Ukraine to terminate all formal diplomatic ties with Russia. Let's go through some details about the relations between these two nations and whether Ukraine will take the risky move to cross Putin's red line. The bilateral relations between the successor states have seen periods of ties, tensions, and outright hostility since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Early in the 1990s, Ukraine's foreign policy focused on securing its sovereignty and independence. It was balanced in its collaboration with the European Union, Russia, and other strong policies. After the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution, which was followed by Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine and the Donbas War, in which Russia backed the separatist rebels of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, relations between the two nations deteriorated. By the beginning of 2020, the hostilities had claimed more than 13,000 lives, resulting in Western sanctions against Russia. Economic relations have been cut and many bilateral agreements have been cancelled. A Russian military buildup on Ukraine's border in 2021 and 22 heightened tensions and deteriorated bilateral ties between the two nations, eventually culminating in Russia starting a full-scale invasion of the nation. In 2022, Ukraine served diplomatic relations with Russia in response to Russia's invasion of that country. In numerous areas across Ukraine, streets with Russian historical figures' names and monuments signifying the goodwill between Russia and Ukraine have been taken down. How were the relations between Russia and Ukraine ruined? A military cooperation pact between Ukraine and Russia that had existed since 1993 was cancelled in May of 2015. Following a commercial ties breakdown, Ukraine stopped supplying Russia with the parts needed to make military equipment. Russia declared in August that it would prohibit importing agricultural products from Ukraine beginning in January of 2016. Ukraine outlawed all direct flights between Ukraine and Russia in October of 2015. All Russian military and commercial aircraft were barred from Ukrainian airspace in November of 2015, and once the free trade agreement between the European Union and Ukraine entered into force in January 2016, Ukrainian MPs decided to impose a trade embargo on Russia in retaliation for the latter's termination of the two nations' free trade zone and the prohibition on food imports. In January 2016, Russia would impose tariffs on Ukrainian goods as Ukraine joins the EU's deep and comprehensive free trade area. On October 5th of 2016, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine formally advised its citizens against visiting Russia due to the rise in the number of unjustified detentions of Ukrainian nationals by Russian law enforcement. It claimed harsh treatment of Ukrainians, use of illegal physical and psychological pressure methods, torture, and other acts that violate human dignity. The European Parliament stated that 71 illegally detained Ukrainian people in Russia and on the Crimean Peninsula in a resolution on Russia dated June 14, 2018. Off the coast of Crimea in November 2018, Russia opened fire on and captured 3 Ukrainian Navy ships, as well as detained its 24 sailors in Moscow. Crew members were injured. An embassy automobile was set on fire, and the incident sparked angry demonstrations outside the Russian mission in Ukraine. Hence, starting on November 26th, martial law was implemented for 30 days in 10 border districts of Ukraine. Due to the prospect of a full-scale conflict with Russia, according to Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, martial law was imposed. All Russian men between 16 and 60 were prohibited from entering Ukraine during the martial law era, which began on November 30th of 2018, except for those traveling for humanitarian reasons. According to Ukraine, this was done as a security precaution to stop Russia from setting up private army formations on Ukrainian territory. The State Border Guard Service restrictive measures on the entry of Russian men into Ukraine were extended, according to a statement released by the Defense Council and National Security Department of Ukraine on December 27, 2018. 1,650 Russian people were denied entrance into Ukraine between November 26th and December 26th of 2018, according to State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. 800 Russian citizens were denied entry into Ukraine by the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine between December 26 and January 11, 2019. After his pleas to Russian President Vladimir Putin to participate in negotiations with Ukraine, the United States, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom in Minsk, the newly elected Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke by the phone with the latter on July 11, 2019. The commanders also talked about exchanging captives. Russia and Ukraine exchanged prisoners on September 7th. A 5-year agreement on Russian gas transit to Europe was reached between Ukraine and Gazprom. On December 7th of 2021, US President Joe Biden met with Russian President Vladimir Putin over a secure video link about the escalating tensions on the Ukrainian border and the expansion of the Russian military presence there, which Putin referred to as a security danger. The election of Volodymyr Zelensky, who resisted Russian incursions on Ukrainian sovereignty, coincided with these tensions. During the video conference, Putin reiterated that he considered Western military activity in Ukraine a threat to Russian national security, saying it was getting close to a red line. In response, Biden said that if Russia were to engage in military action, the United States was prepared to impose a range of economic sanctions that would be more damaging than the sanctions enacted following the annexation of Crimea. Biden specifically raised the possibility of cutting Russia from the massive Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, or SWIFT. European policymakers were worried that this action might make Moscow react even more harshly. The Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic, two separatist nations in eastern Ukraine, received official recognition from Russia on February 21, 2022. On February 26, 2022, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared that Ukrainian troops were preventing Russian troops from approaching Kyiv. At the same time, several Western countries implemented earlier proposed sanctions by severing several Russian institutions from SWIFT, the world's most powerful financial payment system. Putin believed that the Ukrainian people would greet the invading soldiers with flowers and smiles, according to Zelensky, who claimed to be 99.9% positive of this. The invasion was denounced as an aggression war on a global scale. The Justice Court ordered Russia to halt military activities, the Council of Europe evicted Russia, and the United Nations General Assembly requested a complete withdrawal of Russian forces. Several nations imposed more sanctions which impacted the economics of Russia and the rest of the world and gave Ukraine humanitarian and armed support. Putin passed a law in September 2022 that would have given conscription registers a 10-year prison penalty, which prompted a worldwide push to grant Russians seeking asylum. Ukrainians crossing Russia's red line. The Western response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine is still being compromised as the one-year anniversary approaches by inflated fears of the escalation and unfounded worries about the risks of flaming Putin. But the reality of the last 12 months tells a different tale from the gloomy warnings of Western politicians and analysts that Ukraine will suffer terrible repercussions if it dares to rebel. Ukraine has frequently disobeyed Kremlin and disregarded Russia's red lines since the invasion started. Moscow has consistently failed to follow through on its terrifying warnings and has instead withdrawn behind new red lines. Any logical observer should now see that Putin's red lines are a roadmap for Russian failure in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has warned NATO nations that sending troops or weapons to Ukraine would cross a red line for Russia and result in severe reaction, possibly involving the launch of Russian missiles intended for Europe. While foreign ministers assembled in Latvia to review the military's alliance plans for a future Russian invasion, NATO nations warned Putin against continuing his assault against Ukraine. Russia has a long history of setting fictitious red lines for the West and Ukraine. Kremlin authorities were admonishing their Western colleagues that the entry of Ukraine was a red line for many years before Russia's invasion of Ukraine started with the 2014 seizure of Crimea. Moscow then asserted that any military assistance to Kiev crossed a red line for Russia since the start of the Russian aggression against Ukraine 9 years ago. Red lines have been repeatedly established over the past year or so regarding transferring tanks, artillery, air defense systems, and anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. These boundaries have been violated without bringing about the feared Russian reaction. Similarly, Russian efforts to set boundaries for the release of Ukrainian territory under occupation have repeatedly shown to be ineffective. Vladimir Putin presided during a lavish ceremony in the Kremlin in September of 2022 to announce the illegitimate acquisition of 4 partially seized Ukrainian provinces. The Soviet autocrat proclaimed that these areas had been a part of Russia forever. Nevertheless, Russian forces withdrew after the advancing Ukrainian military liberated Kherson a few weeks after Putin's declaration. Thousands of civilians have perished. 13 million people have fled their homes and become refugees due to the fighting. The critical outcome of this war is that the world and Ukraine will not turn a blind eye to the horrors and war crimes done by the Russian Federation. Let's see if Ukrainians can overcome the impossible and cross Russia's red line. Thanks for watching.